Did you know that 15% of murders in the Victorian Britain era were committed by women? Most were reported as self defense. However, the others were outright criminal acts of brutality. Now, Richmond Borough, with the lowest crime rate of Greater London, became the home of one of the most famous murders of that time frame. A maid was deemed with the nickname of Female Sweeney Todd after she was found to have murdered her employer when she was told she would be let go. Now, not only did she murder her, but she cut her up, boiled her, and sold the dripping to people on the streets. She then took her identity and lived as the woman until she was turned in by a neighbor. This is the creepy case of Kate Webster. Hello, fellow fiends. Welcome to another episode of Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces. I am your host, Cassie Opea. Don't forget, as I tell you every week, you can find new episodes every Tuesday, and if you subscribe to the Patreon or the Spotify webpage, you get bonus episodes every other week. Also, you get a merchandise discount good for any item in the Wake and Faye shop at pizzaandpigtails.com. You also get my undying love and support, and you get a welcome to the Fiendish family thank you swag box. All of this you can get for just as little as $5 a month. Now, with the Patreon, there are the different tiers. However, they start as low as $5 a month. Now, I know that you can't always commit to those monthly subscriptions, and if you would like to support one of your favorite content creators, thank you, you can do so without subscribing to the Cash App or the Venmo. Don't forget also just buying merchandise in the Wick and Faye shop, following, liking, commenting, sharing on the socials also helps the podcast get seen. And if you are a big business or a small business, because let's be honest, we don't discriminate, I also have ad space available in future episodes. So reach out to me either through the podcast website or the social media, or you can also email me at creepycases.spookyspaces@gmail.com, and I can send you over a list of my ad packages. So now that is out of the way, all that business stuff, let's get down to this week's creepy case. Now, Julia Thomas was a former school teacher, a 54-year-old widow who lived in Richmond alone. She was actually twice widowed. She was a well-dressed woman who liked the finer things in life. But we'll talk more about Julia later on. Let's begin this story with Catherine Lawler. Now, she was born in 1849 in Killeen County, Wexford, Ireland. Not much is known about her, except she was never married, but she did have one son. She was born into poverty. Her parents were poor, but respectable. She was around 5'5", described as a strongly made woman. She was sallow, with large prominent teeth and freckles. Now, Kate began her life of crime when she was just a child. And in 1864, when she was 15 years old, Kate was arrested for larceny and sent to prison. Could you imagine being 15 years old and being sent to prison for larceny? She was released in 1867, where she ended up stealing a large sum of money because, she learned her lesson, I guess, and ended up sailing to Liverpool. At some point, Kate took on the last name of Webster, which was one of her many aliases that she would be known by during her life, along with Webb, Gibbs, Gibbons, and of course her actual name, Lawler. Now, she claimed that she had married a sea captain and had 4 children with him, but he and the children had all died in an accident. Now, while I'm not saying this isn't true, but chances are it's most likely not, because obviously Kate is known to be a liar. And it would be weird that in such a short period of time, she married a sea captain, had 4 children, and they all died. Now, in 1868, she was sentenced to 4 years of penal servitude, and in 1872, she moved to London, where she worked in the Rose Gardens in London's Hammersmith, where Henry and Anne Porter were her neighbors. And just like Julia, they will show up again in this case a little later. She was then a cook and a housekeeper to Captain Woolbest. Now, Kate became pregnant and had 1 son in the April of 1874. John W., whose father is a mystery, Kate named 3 men who were potentials, as she called them. One was named Strong, whom she had met while working for Woolbest and who had assisted her in a few robberies. She kind of pointed the finger. Well, I don't want to word it. That's not a good way to word it. She kind of pointed to this man, Strong, as the one who was most likely John's father, but they didn't really confirm it. It couldn't be confirmed, and so he actually ended up abandoning her and her child. Now, Kate then became a cleaner, in more ways than one, in local lodging houses. She would go in and clean the rooms by day, earn her pay, rent a room in the same lodging house, and then go in and clean the room of its valuable items that she would then take to the local pawnbroker. Well, she was eventually caught, convicted on 30 counts of larceny, spending 18 months in Wandsworth Prison in 1875, getting out in 1876. In 1877, she went right back to prison for another year. I mean, I guess it's good to have hobbies, but maybe have hobbies that aren't ones you're in and out of prison for. Now, Sarah Crease, a charwoman, and a charwoman is a cleaner of houses and offices, worked for a Miss Loader, and she watched Kate's son while she was incarcerated. Sarah became ill in 1879, and Kate had actually stepped in to help at the Loader house home until she recovered. Now, Miss Loader had a friend named Julia Thomas who was looking for a domestic servant. So she recommended Kate. And when the 2 women met, they got to talking and they hit it off really well. Now, Julia asked Kate for references, but she told her, hey, I'm new to England. I don't really have many acquaintances here. I came over from Ireland. I don't really know anyone. But Sarah vouched for her being a great worker, and I guess Miss Loader also kind of spoke up for her. So Julia hired her on January 29th, 1879. Now, Julia Martha Thomas was a former school teacher who had been widowed twice. And when her second husband passed away in 1873, she was left to live alone in Richmond, London. She was 54 years old, described as a small-statured, well-dressed woman. She was also eccentric and had an excitable temperament. She loved to travel and would often be gone for weeks or even months at a time. And she actually wouldn't tell anyone where she was going, which I kind of like this lady. Not that I wouldn't want to tell people where I was going or I'd be gone for weeks or months, but it'd be nice to just kind of pick up and be like, well, see you later. So Julia was upper middle class, not super wealthy, but she liked to dress the part and wear lots of jewelry to seem as if she was of a higher class. She was a harsh employer who was often too strict and flat out mean towards her employees, and I'm sure you can imagine, this caused her to have a hard time keeping workers on. Now, it was only a few weeks after Kate was hired on when that great relationship that they started with began to deteriorate. Thomas wasn't happy with the quality of Webster's work and would often criticize it, becoming very rude and hostile towards her. And Kate later claimed, quote, "At first, I thought her a nice old lady, but I found her very trying, and she used to do many things to annoy me during my work. When I had finished my work in my rooms, she would go over it again after me and point out places where she said that I did not clean, showing evidence of a nasty spirit towards me." Now, while I get there's a way to go about this, I do think that honestly, if she's coming behind you and can show you that you didn't actually clean, then maybe, do a better job. Um, you're there to clean. Anyway. Now, Thomas also wasn't very happy with Webster's frequent visit to local pubs and would constantly reprimand her for it. Well, Kate said that she would go to the local pubs so much to put up with the yelling and the insults from Julia. Now, as the relationship became more and more strained, Webster grew more and more resentful towards Thomas, making her feel very uncomfortable being alone in the home with Kate, and she would actually have her friends stay over with her. Now, Thomas ended up finally telling Kate she wanted her to leave on February 28th, and she even wrote in her diary, "Gave Catherine warning to leave." Now, when the date arrived, Kate hadn't found new work or a place to live, so she begged Julia to let her stay in the home over the weekend. Unfortunately, Julia agreed, and this would prove to be a fateful mistake on her part. Now, on Sunday morning, March 2nd, 1879, Julia Thomas went to church as usual. Kate was off on Sunday afternoons, but she was to be home by a certain time so Julia could make it to the evening service. This particular afternoon, Kate went to visit her son, stopping at a pub on the way back to Vine Cottages, causing her to get back late. Now, after reprimanding Kate, Julia rushed off so as not to make herself late for the evening service. The fellow churchgoers said that she seemed really agitated, and no one knows why for sure, but Julia actually left the church before the service was over and went home alone. Now, the exact events that took place next were only known by Kate and Julia, but in Kate's confession, she described the incident. "We had an argument, which ripened into a quarrel, and in the height of my anger and rage, I threw her from the top of the stairs to the ground floor. She had a heavy fall. I felt that she was seriously injured, and I became agitated at what had happened, lost all control of myself, and to prevent her from screaming or getting me in trouble, I caught her by the throat, and in the struggle, I choked her." Sounds a little convenient. Now, the neighbor actually heard the noise of the fall, but it was followed by silence. So she thought nothing of it, thought maybe somebody had dropped something, maybe somebody had knocked something over. But I don't think anyone could have suspected that what was happening behind closed doors. Now, after killing Julia, Kate had the dilemma of getting rid of her body. Now, she could have just left it and escaped, but she got greedy and decided to dismember and dispose of the parts in the river. She started by cutting off the head with a razor and meat claw, then began to hack off the limbs. She put the limbs and torso in a copper pot on the stove, parboiling them. She then burned Julia's organs and intestines. Kate stated she was even revolted by all of the blood everywhere, but she kept burning and boiling the body parts, packing them into a wooden box, except for the head and one foot that wouldn't fit. She then sold the fatty remains from the boiling as dripping to the locals in the neighborhood. Yeah. Now, a neighbor reported a strange smell coming from next door, and Kate got rid of the spare foot on a manure heap, but was still trying to figure out what to do with Julia's head. She placed it in a black bag, cleaned up the cottage, threw one of Julia's silk dresses, and went to visit the Porter family, whom she hadn't seen in 6 years. She told them that she had been married and her name was now Mrs. Thomas, but she was widowed. I don't know how people didn't catch on to this. Like, did nobody sit here and go, man, you've had a lot of husbands who've died. You've had a lot of last names. Like, is nobody just gone, what's up with this lady? She also told them that she had benefited under the wheel of an aunt who left her a house in Richmond, which she wanted to sell as she had decided to return to Ireland. So she asked for the recommendation of a broker. So Kate had decided to head home to see her son, but stopped at a pub, and she invited both Henry and his son Robert along. Now, Henry and his son Robert helped carry the bag for Kate on their walk to the train. She returned without the bag, but she still had this wooden box to get rid of, and she asked if Robert could help her with this. They carried the wooden box between them to Richmond Bridge, where Kate told him that she was meeting someone who she would actually be giving the box to, and told him to just go ahead and continue on without her. As Robert was walking away, he says that he heard the splash of something heavy hitting the river below a few minutes later, and then Kate caught back up to him. The next morning, Henry Wheatley, a porter, found the box with Julia's remains, immediately reporting it to Inspector Harbour at Barnes Police Station. Now, a local doctor found that they were from a human female, stating the skin had displayed signs of having been boiled. And of course, without the head, they had no way to identify who the body belonged to. It was at this time that Kate began calling herself Mrs. Thomas. She was wearing the dead woman's clothes and jewelry, sleeping in her bed, and even selling her possessions. Henry Porter had introduced her to John Church, a general dealer who purchased the contents of the home. Now, the two became friends and began going out drinking together. Now, the real Mrs. Thomas had not been reported missing because it was normal for her to just disappear for long periods of time. So everyone thought, all right, she's just on another of her trips, whatever. The papers were referring to the remains as the barn mystery, so Kate actually felt pretty safe because, there's this lady who disappears all the time and the remains are still, nobody knows whose they are, so she thought she could, she was scot-free. Except Robert told his parents about the box that he had carried for Kate. Church arranged for the contents of the home to be removed. Now, Mrs. Ives, the neighbor, who originally reported the smell, began to question what was happening. Now, Mrs. Church later found Julia's purse and diary in one of her dresses. A letter from a man named Menhinnick, who knew the real Mrs. Thomas and felt her body could be the one in the box. Now, Henry Porter, John Church, and Menhinnick all got together and went to the Richmond police station. The next day, a search of the home found an axe, a razor, and some charred bones, along with the missing handle from the box that was found in the river. On March 23rd, a full description of Kate was circulated by the police in connection with the murder of Mrs. Julia Martha Thomas and the theft of her effects. Now, Kate had already fled to Ireland, taking her son with her, but this was the first place that police looked for her. And she was arrested on March 28th and taken back to England while being formally charged on March 30th. Her trial began on July 2nd, 1879, at the Central Criminal Court, also known as the Old Bailey. The Crown was led by Sir Hardringe Gidford, and Kate was defended by Warner Slay. Mary Durden testified for the prosecution, telling them that on February 25th, Kate had confided she would be going to Birmingham to take over the home and the possessions left to her by an aunt who had recently passed away. Now, this actually proved premeditation and not the crime of, passion or rage that Kate had originally described in her confession. And because this was 6 days before the murder that Kate was saying her aunt had died. Now, Kate tried pointing the finger at Henry Porter and John Church, but on Tuesday, July 8th, the jury took just over an hour to find Kate Webster guilty. Now, it also didn't help that she basically sat there looking stoic and emotionless, and as if she didn't care that this woman was murdered or that she was sitting on trial for it. Now, before she was sentenced, she denied the charge, which is weird because she had originally admitted to murder. But I guess she was just trying to claim more of like a manslaughter, accidental death than full out murder. But she did clear Porter and Church. Now, when asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she stood before the court and claimed she was pregnant. Now, of course, you can't send a pregnant woman to her death, so a panel of matrons were brought in, but it was determined to be just another lie, as they had suspected anyway. And Kate was sent to Wandsworth, a place she was familiar with, and she was actually guarded 24/7 by female prisoner guards. It was here that she would try to point the blame on Strong, the man who had abandoned her and the man who she had kind of claimed was her son's father. But after being told that there would be nothing done to help her, she finally confessed to her solicitor and Father McHenry and said that she had accepted her fate and she would almost rather be executed than return to a life of misery and deception. The execution was scheduled for 3 Sundays after the sentence, which was the usual time frame. Kate was the only woman to be hanged this day, and at 9:00 a.m., Kate was in her cell being ministered by Father McHenry, accompanied by 2 female wards. When it was time, the governor went to her cell and let her out. She was walked across the yard to the execution shed, which was nicknamed Cold Meat Shed, apparently. She was placed on the chalk mark on the trapdoors, where a leather belt was placed around her waist, where they also secured her wrists. Her ankles were strapped together with a leather strap. A white hood was placed over her head, adjusting and leaving the free rope down her back. Her last words were, "Lord, have mercy on me." The lever was pulled and Kate plummeted around 8 feet into the brick-lined pit below, taking the location of Mrs. Thomas's head with her. Her body was left for about an hour before finally being taken down. Kate's body was buried in an unmarked grave in one of the exercise yards at Wandsworth. Now, 2 things I'd like to point out were during the argument that Kate said happened, there was supposedly no sound except for when she pulled pushed Julia off the stairs. Now, there was just the third party, there was just that thud heard by the neighbor. Also, there was blood at the top of the stairs, so it definitely wasn't just like this spur of the moment killing, because it's like if you had an altercation and you just threw this woman down the stairs, there wouldn't be blood at the top of the stairs. In October of 2010, Sir David Attenborough, a British broadcaster, writer, biologist, and natural historian, purchased the land adjacent to his own while he was doing an expansion on his home. Now, there was a former pub called Hole in the Wall, and while workers were excavating, they found a skull. Now, this skull had abrasions and lesions consistent with falling down stairs. It was found that the skin had depleted collagen, which is a sign that it was boiled. And the skull was found in what would have been almost the exact spot that Miss Julia Thomas's house or garden stood 130 years prior. Now, could you imagine buying land to expand your home only to find a skull dating back to the 1870s and solving one of the biggest mysteries from that time frame? I think that's kind of cool. And on that note, I will see you next crime. Thank you for listening to Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces, a Pizza and Pigtails production, created and hosted by Cassiopeia. Don't forget, you can find new episodes of the creepiest and spookiest content every Tuesday. If you subscribe to the Patreon or the Anchor pages, which you can do for as little as $5 a month, you get access to bonus episodes every other week, a merchandise discount good for all purchases at the Wick and Faye shop at pizzaandpigtails.com, and you get a thank you swag box full of creepy cases and spooky spaces merchandise. If you'd like to support without subscribing, you can do so through the Cash App and Venmo links. Be sure to follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and all the socials for future news and updates. And don't forget to like, share, and comment. Bring your fellow fiends in on those conversations. And as always, I will see you next crime.